For months, the world has watched King Charles with growing unease. Every public appearance dissected, every gesture analyzed, every silence questioned. But nothing prepared the royal family or the public for the devastating confirmation that has just emerged from behind palace walls. The news is heartbreaking, the implications are enormous, and Prince William and Catherine's response has shocked everyone. What really happened behind those closed doors? And why is this moment being called the most defining chapter in the modern monarchy? Stay with me, because the details emerging now are more emotional than anything the palace has ever released. But before we go any further, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a single royal update. Let's get into it. Here's what happened. And this is the kind of royal moment that changes everything without anyone raising their voice. There was no dramatic balcony speech. There was no urgent press conference. There was no carefully staged public moment. Instead, the news arrived quietly behind closed doors, where only a handful of people knew what had just been confirmed. According to multiple royal insiders, King Charles's cancer is now considered incurable. The focus is no longer on defeating the illness. The focus is on managing it for as long as possible. That single word, incurable, hit harder than any headline the British press has ever published about the monarchy. It carried a weight that no carefully chosen palace statement could soften, and it left the entire royal household asking the same terrifying question. What happens now? And then, almost immediately, everything changed. Within minutes of the private confirmation reaching senior members of the royal family, Prince William and Princess Catherine reportedly made the difficult decision to address the situation together. Rather than allowing a cold, formal statement to do all the talking, they chose to stand side by side and deliver the message themselves. It was a deeply symbolic moment. The country wasn't ready for what it was hearing, and for millions watching around the world, it felt as though the royal family had quietly stepped into an entirely new era. Behind the scenes, the emotional weight of that moment was impossible to ignore. William reportedly didn't grab the document and read it casually. He stood still, staring at the page as though every single sentence carried the power to reshape his entire future. Catherine remained beside him, saying very little. She didn't interrupt his thoughts. She didn't rush him through the pain. Instead, she simply stayed close, offering the kind of silent, steady support that no camera would ever truly capture. And sometimes, the quietest moments reveal the deepest emotions. Then came the sentence that immediately caught everyone's attention. The document reportedly explained that senior royal duties would now be urgently reviewed. On the surface, those words sounded administrative, almost routine. But inside the palace, they meant something far greater. They suggested that preparations were already underway for a future in which others, especially Prince William, might need to carry significantly more of the monarchy's daily responsibilities. Suddenly, this was no longer only about the king's health. This was about the future leadership of the crown itself. William reportedly read that final section more than once. For a brief moment, his grip on the paper tightened before slowly relaxing, as though he understood there was nothing anyone could do to change what was written. Perhaps the most heartbreaking detail of all. King Charles was reportedly not present when the confirmation was discussed. For decades, he had stood at the center of every major royal decision. Now his absence spoke louder than any words ever could, leaving behind the unmistakable feeling that life inside the palace had already begun to change forever. So, who got the news first? And how did they react when the first blow landed? The health report changed everything the moment everyone inside the palace had been quietly dreading finally arrived. This wasn't a rumor whispered through royal corridors. This wasn't another round of worrying headlines. This time it was official. After a private meeting with the king's most trusted medical advisors, a sealed health report was delivered directly to the royal family. The message inside wasn't meant for the public, not yet. It was meant for the people who needed to prepare for what could come next, before any statement could be written or any spokesperson could face the cameras. Prince William and Princess Catherine were given the truth. It was no longer about hopeful guesses or cautious optimism. The doctors had delivered a serious warning, one important enough that the future king and queen were told before almost anyone else. In that single moment, everything shifted. The family wasn't simply facing uncertainty anymore. They were confronting a reality that could reshape both their lives and the future of the British monarchy. William quietly finished reading the report before placing it back on the table. He didn't throw it down in anger. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue with anyone in the room. Instead, silence. And somehow, that silence spoke louder than any emotional outburst ever could. Catherine looked at him and saw more than the future king of Britain. She saw a son carrying the crushing weight of heartbreaking news while desperately trying to keep his emotions under control. She knew that before long, millions of people would hear the same words through television broadcasts and news alerts. But in that room, before the headlines, the pain belonged only to a family. Almost immediately, quiet instructions spread throughout the palace. Every royal household was told the same thing. No unnecessary travel, no off-record conversations, no casual comments to staff, friends, or reporters. And above all, no official statement would be made until William had spoken. Everyone understood what was at stake. A single careless remark could spark panic across the country. An overly hopeful message could later appear dishonest if the situation worsened. The palace needed complete control of the story, while the family desperately needed just a little more time to absorb what they had learned. Sadly, King Charles's condition allowed them very little of either. Before the final announcement was prepared, William turned toward Catherine. He didn't need advice. He didn't need comforting words. One quiet look between them said everything. Her calm presence reminded him that he wouldn't have to face the coming storm alone. Once the news became public, it would no longer remain a deeply personal family tragedy. It would become a national story, a defining moment for the monarchy, and a test of everyone standing closest to the crown. For William, it reopened childhood fears he thought he had long overcome. For Catherine, it marked the beginning of standing even more firmly beside her husband. For King Charles, it was a painful reminder that no crown can slow the passage of time. And for Queen Camilla, it signaled the start of a loneliness that no royal title could ever erase. While everyone believed King Charles was getting better, what medical examination revealed the shocking news? And how did it happen? Let me take you back. This is where everything changed. Not during a dramatic public appearance. Not after a shocking headline splashed across the front pages. Not in front of flashing cameras. Instead, it all began behind the closed doors of Windsor Castle, during what was supposed to be nothing more than a quiet family dinner. It was a private moment that almost no one knew about at the time. Yet, those who were there would never look at the monarchy the same way again. King Charles had reportedly gone into that evening determined to show that everything was under control. The purpose of the dinner was simple: to discuss future royal responsibilities in a calm, relaxed setting without alarming anyone. More than anything, the king wanted to reassure his family that he was still fully capable of carrying the enormous weight of the crown. Every upcoming engagement, every public appearance, and every major decision represented more than just work. They were proof that the monarch remained strong enough to lead. But then something unexpected happened. As the conversation flowed around the table, Charles reportedly reached for his glass. Before he could take a sip, he suddenly stopped. His words faded away in the middle of a sentence, and he slowly lifted his eyes toward Prince William. The expression on his face instantly changed the atmosphere in the room. Without anyone saying a single word, everyone sensed that something was terribly wrong. William noticed it almost immediately. Long before anyone dared to mention it aloud, he saw the strength disappear from his father's voice. Across the table, Catherine quietly watched as Charles gripped the edge of the table with his fingers, almost as though he were trying to steady himself through sheer determination alone. She didn't interrupt. She didn't draw attention to it. She simply watched, realizing that this looked like far more than ordinary exhaustion. It seemed as if the king's own body was sending a warning that could no longer be ignored. Charles reportedly tried to carry on as though nothing had happened. He forced himself to continue speaking, determined not to lose control of the moment. But then came another pause. This one lasted only a few seconds, yet those seconds felt far longer. The silence spoke louder than any admission ever could. That was when William reacted. He pushed back his chair, not dramatically, but quickly enough for everyone at the table to notice. In that single movement, those present reportedly saw something shift. He was no longer simply a concerned son. He instinctively stepped into the role of protector, ready to take charge if necessary. Catherine watched it happen in real time, realizing that William had crossed an invisible line from worry into responsibility. The dinner ended much earlier than planned. No public explanation followed. No announcement was made. Instead, a confidential medical assessment was reportedly arranged after Charles returned to his private rooms. From that moment on, palace discussions were no longer focused on whether something was wrong. The far more troubling question had become, just how much longer could it remain hidden? How did the royal family receive the shocking news? How hard did it hit them? And what was that shocking moment that caught Queen Camilla completely off guard? The royal family had survived scandals, public criticism, family disagreements, and years of intense media attention. But the private meeting that followed the confirmation of King Charles's health condition was different. There were no cameras, no official photographers, no carefully prepared smiles. Behind the closed doors of the palace, King Charles, Queen Camilla, Prince William, and Princess Catherine came together for what would become one of the most emotional conversations the family had faced in years. The mood in the room was heavy, with personal feelings, family loyalty, and the future of the monarchy all hanging in the balance. Camilla wasted little time before speaking. According to reports, she wanted answers. Why had she been left out of one of the biggest decisions the family had made in years? She questioned why William and Catherine had taken such a leading role in announcing the king's health to the public. In her eyes, the statement had gone too far. She believed it made Charles appear more fragile than necessary, and worried that it had changed the way people would now see both the king and the monarchy. To Camilla, this wasn't just about one announcement. It was about trust, influence, and her place inside the royal family. King Charles reportedly listened in silence. He looked exhausted, saying very little as the discussion unfolded around him. William, however, stood firm. Calm but determined, he defended the decision without hesitation. He argued that hiding the truth would only have made things worse in the long run. If the palace had tried to keep the king's condition secret, public trust could have been damaged far more than by simply being honest from the beginning. For William, protecting the crown meant being truthful even when the truth was painful. As the tension continued to rise, Catherine gently stepped into the conversation. Rather than choosing sides, she reminded everyone of something they seemed to be forgetting. Charles, she said, was not only the king. He was also a husband, a father, and a man facing an incredibly personal challenge. The last thing he needed was to watch his own family argue over how much of his struggle the public should be allowed to see. Then came the moment that changed everything. Breaking his silence, Charles revealed that he had personally trusted William and Catherine to lead the announcement, because he believed they would protect both the truth and the monarchy's future. Reports also suggested that discussions were already underway about William taking on even more royal duties, much sooner than anyone had expected. In that quiet moment, it became clear that the future of the monarchy was no longer a distant conversation. It had already begun. How quickly did things begin to change after the announcement? Did the shift in power sit well with all members of the royal family? Let's take a closer look. So here's where the story takes a much more personal turn. After the confirmation of King Charles's health challenges, the biggest changes inside the palace didn't come with a dramatic speech, a historic announcement, or a grand royal ceremony. Instead, they appeared almost silently. They showed up in updated schedules, private meetings, official paperwork, and the growing number of royal duties that slowly began finding their way onto Prince William's desk. Almost without noticing it, William was taking one careful step after another toward the throne he had always known would one day be his. But this wasn't the future he had hoped would arrive so soon. One report described William sitting quietly with a thick folder containing responsibilities his father could no longer comfortably manage. Each page carried another engagement, another ceremony, another decision that Charles might have to hand over. It wasn't just paperwork. To William, every document was another reminder that his father's health was changing and that reality was becoming impossible to ignore. Instead of feeling proud or excited, he reportedly felt something far more human: heartbreak. The promotions and new responsibilities meant very little compared to seeing his father face such a difficult chapter. Thankfully, he wasn't facing it alone. Princess Catherine remained by his side, offering the kind of steady support that rarely makes newspaper headlines, but often matters the most. Rather than encouraging William to think about becoming king, she reminded him of something far more important. Helping King Charles wasn't about replacing him. It was about standing beside him, protecting his dignity, easing his workload, and allowing him to continue serving the nation in every way his health still allowed. Before William could fully embrace his destiny as Britain's future monarch, he first wanted the chance to simply be a loving son. Then another discovery reportedly made the situation even more emotional. As palace officials quietly reorganized the king's calendar, it became clear that Charles had already been preparing William for this moment, long before the public knew anything about his health. Several major engagements had been quietly reassigned months earlier, suggesting that the king had been planning ahead while carrying the weight of his illness in private. That realization reportedly hit William hard. He had never wanted greater responsibility to come at the cost of his father's well-being. Catherine didn't try to erase that sadness with comforting words. Instead, she gently reminded him that Charles was still both king and father, deserving of the same loyalty, respect, and love he had always received. At the same time, Queen Camilla reportedly noticed subtle changes unfolding behind palace walls. Decisions that once reached her office first were increasingly being reviewed by William. Charles remained firmly on the throne, but behind closed doors, the balance of responsibility was quietly shifting as a father carefully prepared his son for a future neither of them had wished would arrive so quickly. Did William seem prepared to sit in his father's chair? What does the public think of him as the heir to the throne? And would Britain be pleased to have him as acting king? So here's something that caught a lot of people's attention. When Britons were asked who they trusted to lead the monarchy in the future, one name stood out above everyone else: Prince William. The results weren't even close. A strong majority of people said they believed he would make a good king, showing just how much confidence the public has in a man expected to one day wear the crown. While every royal attracts both supporters and critics, William appeared to enjoy a level of public trust that very few members of the royal family could match. An Ipsos poll, later reported by Newsweek, found that around 62% of those surveyed believed William would do a good job as king. Only a small number felt he would perform poorly in the role. Those figures painted a clear picture. For many people across Britain, William wasn't simply the next in line to the throne. He was seen as someone already preparing for the enormous responsibility that lies ahead. What made the findings even more interesting was how William compared with his father, King Charles. At the time of the survey, William's approval ratings were noticeably higher, suggesting that many people felt increasingly confident about the future of the monarchy, believing that the next generation could strengthen the institution and guide it into a new era. But this popularity didn't appear overnight. It has been built over many years. William has carefully developed an image of stability, responsibility, and quiet dedication. Unlike several royal figures who have found themselves surrounded by controversy, he has largely avoided major scandals while continuing to carry out his public duties. Alongside Catherine, Princess of Wales, he has become one half of what many people see as the modern face of the monarchy. Together, they are often viewed as a dependable team, combining tradition with a more relatable family life. Perhaps the most remarkable part of the survey was that William's support reached across different age groups, political opinions, and backgrounds. Although younger people were generally less enthusiastic about the monarchy itself, many of them still viewed William in a positive light. In other words, even some people who questioned the future of the institution continued to express confidence in the future king as an individual. Researchers behind the poll suggested that this level of support reflected a widespread belief that William could provide a smooth transition whenever the crown eventually passes to him. His reputation as a devoted husband, caring father, and experienced working royal has convinced many that he is ready for the challenges ahead. While public opinion can always change, these findings suggested that for now, Prince William remains the royal in whom the British public has placed its greatest hopes for the future of the monarchy. How did the whole nation react to King Charles's state of health? And how did the royal palace handle the situation? So, by the time the sun came up the next morning, the palace no longer felt like the same place. It wasn't filled with its usual quiet routine or careful order. Instead, there was a heavy silence hanging over every hallway, as though the entire building had been shaken by news no one was truly prepared to face. The announcement had spread faster than anyone expected. Before palace officials could organize a response, the story was already everywhere. Staff members exchanged worried glances, whispered behind closed doors, and quietly rewrote schedules that had suddenly become meaningless. One small moment captured the change better than anything else. Camilla stood alone beside a window as an aide carefully removed King Charles's next official engagement from the palace board. She didn't protest. She didn't ask questions. She simply watched the card disappear. It was only a small piece of paper, but it represented something much bigger. Every canceled appearance would now become another public reminder that the king was no longer able to carry out his duties as before. The reality was becoming impossible to hide. Meanwhile, Prince William's phone barely stopped ringing. The very first call came before the household had even settled into the day, and from that moment onward, every conversation seemed to carry the same message. This was no longer about offering support or expressing concern. It was about preparing for what came next. Palace officials were already reshaping future plans, moving responsibilities, and discussing how the monarchy would continue if the king's health kept declining. Standing nearby, Catherine listened as William answered one call after another. His replies became shorter with each conversation. It wasn't because he was being distant, it was because he was forcing himself to stay calm. Every new decision pushed him closer to the role he had always known would one day be his. But now, that future suddenly felt much closer than anyone had imagined. He wasn't simply being asked to help his father. He was slowly being asked to prepare to lead. Outside the palace walls, the news spread just as quickly. In homes, offices, cafes, taxis, and busy streets, people paused whatever they were doing to absorb the shocking update. Before long, small groups began gathering outside Buckingham Palace. Among them was an elderly woman who quietly placed a single white rose against the railings. Looking toward the palace, she softly whispered that the king had seemed tired for a very long time. William caught sight of the touching scene from inside. He quickly turned away, not because he was embarrassed by his emotions, but because seeing complete strangers mourn the pain his own family had been carrying in private made the moment feel heartbreakingly real. Beside him, Catherine said nothing at all. She simply stayed close, knowing that sometimes silence offers more comfort than words ever could. So, what was left of the monarchy after the king's health deteriorated? And did the royal family look prepared to adjust to this sudden change? In the end, the heartbreaking confirmation didn't bring the monarchy crashing down the way many people feared. Instead, it did something far more powerful. It pulled back the curtain and revealed the people behind the crowns. For once, the world wasn't looking at grand ceremonies, polished speeches, or carefully planned appearances. It was seeing a family facing pain, uncertainty, and impossible responsibility, just like anyone else, only under the eyes of millions. This wasn't simply an announcement about a king's health. It became a defining moment for the entire royal family. Prince William and Princess Catherine didn't just stand before the public to deliver difficult news, they became the steady hands guiding a deeply wounded family through one of the hardest chapters in its modern history. Every word they spoke, every expression they wore, and every step they took carried the weight of generations. King Charles, despite everything he was facing, accepted the changes with remarkable calm. Rather than seeing his reduced role as a personal loss, he appeared to recognize that the future of the monarchy was already taking shape. When he looked toward William, it wasn't with disappointment or regret, it was with quiet pride. It was the kind of look a father gives a son when he knows the time has come to pass on responsibilities that can no longer be carried alone. William, however, knew this was no moment for celebration. There were no smiles, no sense of victory. He understood that the crown was becoming heavier with every passing day. Standing beside him was Catherine, whose quiet strength once again proved invaluable. She didn't need grand speeches or dramatic gestures. Her calm presence alone seemed to give William the confidence to remain composed, even as the emotional burden threatened to overwhelm him. And then there was Queen Camilla. The transition was deeply emotional as she watched both her husband's role and her own influence gradually change. Although accepting the growing responsibilities of William and Catherine was difficult, she ultimately recognized that protecting King Charles meant trusting the future he had placed in them. More than a story about illness, this became a defining moment for the monarchy. Charles demonstrated honesty in the face of hardship. William offered steady leadership, and Catherine brought compassion and grace. Together, they guided the royal family through a painful chapter, proving that true leadership is often revealed during life's greatest challenges. So, what do you think about King Charles's health status? Would William be the perfect replacement at this moment? We'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below. And if this video moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who follows the royal family closely.